Strange, but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Time slip, a glitch, or maybe call it a tear in the fabric of the time-space continuum. Whatever label you want to put on it, this story had the people who experienced it completely freaked out and unable to come up with any reasonable explanation. Even the police who investigated the incident couldn't understand a lot of what they discovered. This is Time Glitch in the Australian Outback. I thought just about everybody had seen weird, inexplicable lights when driving in the Outback. Countless times I've had those ones that are far away and keep pace with you, that as you go past a hill they reappear on the other side of you and keep doing it. And the freakiest story I ever heard was told to me by an American traveler while his wife lay in the car, sobbing. It was so freaky, I wish I had never heard it. I wish I had never met them. I really do. I was out in Peterborough in southern Australia, in old gold mining fields doing some drilling for samples back in the early 1980s, when we broke a bit of equipment on the shaft and had to come back into town to do repairs. We drove back out to the highway from Broken Hill to Peterborough and stopped at a roadhouse for fuel. I went in for a drink. There was a creepy silence in the place, and a woman was quietly crying at a table being consoled by two men. She was crying in that deep, traumatized way that makes you not want to look, makes you speak quietly when you order and leave quickly. Back in Peterborough, we spent the rest of the day welding and chasing parts and phoning in progress reports and being yelled at. At dusk, we hit the pub for a couple of drinks and drove back to the caravan park, looking forward to a shower and barbecue steaks. When we pulled in, I noticed a vehicle parked next to our rental van. We had seen it at the roadhouse. Sure enough, when I got out of the truck, I heard the same terrible sobbing coming from the van next door. I didn't think about it much. I went to take a shower, and then when I came back from the shower blocks, I saw a guy in his 50s sitting near the barbecue area with his head in his hands, smoking a cigarette. I grabbed my food and a couple of Strongbow ciders and went out to barbecue my dinner. I was selfishly relieved to hear the lady had stopped crying by this point. Man, I thought we were in for a long night. But I was curious. The guy looked up and we greeted one another. I started preparations and I snuck a look at him every now and then. He was still sitting there, but he just wasn't there mentally. He was lost in his head. He wasn't crying, but it was etched all over his face. He was far from okay. I cooked for a little bit and then opened a cider. The action of me doing so startled him and he jerked at the action. I said I was sorry, then offered him one. He looked at it for a little too long, but then said, "Sure." I could tell by that one word he was an American. He took it from my hand and said, "Thanks." He said his wife was exhausted and had finally fallen asleep. He asked if I minded if he stayed around while I cooked dinner. I told him that was fine and that I had been at the roadhouse earlier and had seen the both of them. I mentioned that I had seen and heard his wife crying, and he went all white with the memory. I asked if they had had an accident. He said, "Sir, I don't know what we had." He fell silent, thinking. I finished cooking the eggs and I piled them on the steaks and said I'd be right back. I took the tray inside and put it on the table. I turned mine into a couple of steak burgers and headed back out to the guy. He was still lost in thought, and I opened a new cider and I ate my dinner. After a while, he turned and looked at me and said, "Sorry for the silence." Then he started to tell me. She broke down this morning as soon as she opened the tent. We both did, truth be told. We both did. We don't know what happened. We aren't injured. We just can't explain it. We just got in the Jeep and drove. We talked it out, but we don't know what happened. When we saw the roadhouse, we started saying, what happens if it's different? What happens if they aren't the same people? Or if they are but don't remember us. But we stopped in front, got out, and we held hands and went in. It was the same. Exactly the same. Sparkling clean, cafe menu, blackboard, cakes piled in cake display cases all along the counter. And as we stood there, we could see the same bunch of young guys with aprons rushing around behind the counter. I thought to myself, yep, that's the Roadhouse. But the same as what? Personally, it was a new one on me. These 6 fellows had bought the place, and it was an oasis. Real coffee, best damn cakes I'd had in my life. Gourmet rolls and sandwiches and pastries. We stopped every time we passed it, which was every day because it was the turnoff to the fields that we were working in at that time. The American continued. The same guy who served us the day before saw us and said, "Hey, I told you that walnut cake was good, but you had the last 2 pieces yesterday, and we haven't had time to make more." And he laughed. And Joni passed out cold. She just flopped like a wet towel. The guys ran out and helped her into a chair, and he sat with us while I tried to explain. He took a swig and he said, "You know the funny thing? I don't even drink." And he smiled. I told him that the way he looked, this was probably a good time to start. He explained that he was a professor at a small college in the Midwest of the United States. His wife was Australian, a librarian, and that he had had 6 weeks off and they were on their way to Alice Springs to visit her parents and to see Uluru. The day before yesterday, they had driven in toward Broken Hill, and he first noticed the light, a blue light far away on the horizon. He said it was odd because it never went away. It was there for most of the trip. They got to Broken Hill and bought bread from the deli and drove out of town towards Peterborough, intending to camp. They turned off on a dirt road and drove for a bit, and he noticed the light was back again. They turned off on a flat plain and parked at a good spot, set up the tent, and he dragged some rocks into a circle and made a fire. They toasted bread and heated open cans of baked beans and spaghetti in the fire, and then they went straight to bed. In the morning, they heated a bucket of water and washed up, made a thermos of coffee, packed up and left, leaving the burnt cans of beans and spaghetti behind. 30 minutes after they had hit the main road to Peterborough, Joni remembered the empty cans. She had seen them as soon as she had opened the tent in the morning and reminded herself to put them in the garbage to dispose of in town, but had forgotten to do so. She asked her husband to go back, but he refused. They were both environmentalists, and they had had an argument about whether it was worse to leave the cans there or burn fuel driving all the way back. She was not happy that he didn't turn back and felt really guilty about leaving the mess. When they saw the Roadhouse, they decided to pull in for breakfast, and they ordered the cake and coffee. Ended up having 2 cups each, and they both thought the cake was some of the best they had ever had. The guy told them to buy some bacon cheese quiche for the road, so she did. 4 pieces. They drove on to Peterborough, got some fuel, and drove through on their way to Port Augusta and the turnoff to Alice Springs. They drove after dark again, and the blue light appeared on the horizon. This time, he talked about it with Joni. She wasn't worried, but he said it bothered him because it just stayed out there in the same distance for too long. It should have diminished as he drove further. They turned off the highway to find a spot to camp for the night. They found a spot about 50 meters from the road. They got out the tent and set it up. The husband made a fire by digging a hole, but didn't set up any stones around it like they had the night before. The 2 of them sat around it, talking for quite a while, enjoying their night. They ate the bacon cheese quiche they had bought earlier in the day and drank coffee, noting it was a drastic difference in canned beans and spaghetti from the night before. They also noticed how the hillocks cut the noise of passing trucks to almost zero. After a little while longer, they decided to turn in for the night. Just as they were falling asleep, there was this blazing flash of blue light, just flashed over them in a buzz like a blowfly. All passed their senses in a part of a second. They jumped up and got out of the tent, but the sky was dark. Martin grabbed a torch and ran up the side of the hill to the top and looked around. No light. Nothing. He checked down the hill to see if there were any vehicles or lights, but there was nothing to see. He came back, and they talked about it for a while. Talked about lightning or aircraft. Talked about moving camp. After an uneventful hour, they decided to go back to sleep. "So what happened after the flash and the buzz?" I asked. He picked up the bottle and took a long drink before answering. "We don't know," he moaned. "We woke up this morning, and Joni opened the tent and got out and just started screaming. I stuck my head out in a panic and saw the circle of stones and the charred cans of beans and spaghetti. I started screaming too." They had woken up in the campsite they had remembered from the day before, but it wasn't the day before. At this point, he stopped talking as a police car pulled into the caravan park and stopped at the manager's office. A police officer got out, and as he walked toward the office, he looked over and saw us, waved to Martin, and walked back to the car and drove up to us. He got out and greeted Martin and got a couple of rolls and bags and a tent and a pouch out of the trunk and put them on the ground. He came over and squatted down in front of Martin, and with a glance at me, he started to talk to Martin. "Mr. Faulkner, as you can see, we have found your campsite and have brought you back your belongings. We need to tell you that there are 3 sets of wheel tracks going in and out to the place you camped. All those tire marks belong to your vehicle. There are no tracks anywhere around the site, and nothing unusual either. Both sets of boot marks from you and your wife are visible, and there is no sign of anything out of the ordinary at all. The doctor that you saw this afternoon has requested that neither of you drive until he checks you both tomorrow to see how you're doing. So we need you to stay around. Do you understand? The doctor says you are both suffering from shock. Okay?" Martin nodded. He got up and grabbed some bags and walked down to their vehicle and packed it in. The police officer looked at me hard and asked me how long I'd known these people. I told him I'd just recently met them and had heard the story. I asked, "What do you make of all this?" He watched Martin crawl in the back of the vehicle. "We don't know what to make of it. None of us can figure out how to write up the report. What do we say? Their stories match. He says there were 5 flashes over them during the night, and she says 7. Even that makes sense because they were sleeping. Probably slept through some or imagined others when they were dozing. No crime has been committed that we can figure. If they are playing some practical joke, then we can't figure out how they could have done it. Not even with trucks and cranes, and nobody can act that good. No, this is genuine, but genuine what?" I was none the wiser, but more curious than ever. I was aware that I had to go out to work in that very same remote scrub tomorrow. Martin came back, and the police officer said, "We called your wife's parents, and they know there will be a delay, but you better call them tomorrow to explain. Also, Mr. Faulkner, Port Augusta police know of the gravel pit and have been there to examine it. Everything is just as you say exactly. They found the fire and even your boot tracks up the incline to the top and back down again. They also confirmed there is only 1 set of tire tracks in the dust going in, none leaving. There was not any tent or other signs that you were there, however. We don't know what happened, but we are working on it. You rest and take it easy. We'll be in touch tomorrow." The officer got in his car and began to drive away. Martin's face was still illuminated by the red light. He said, "Yeah, tomorrow. I just hope we wake up or we actually go to sleep this time." This has been another strange but true story. Have you ever experienced something that you can't quite explain? We would love to hear about it. Send us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this story in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'm Steve White. Until next time.